Hello and welcome back to Steady As She Goes. Tá fáilte rótar Asherish. You're very welcome back aboard for episode 12. Now, before we get underway this week, I just want to take a brief moment to say thank you. Over the past few days, the podcast has passed 1,000 streams and downloads, and it's now being listened to into 24 different countries. For an independent maritime podcast started here in Rossiter Harbour, that genuinely means a great deal. That's 1,000 times someone has chosen to press play from right here at home to listeners further afield across 24 countries, which is something I never quite imagined when all this began. So if you've tuned in, shared an episode, sent a message or told a friend, genuinely thank you very much. You're helping us to build something really special here. Now, coming up this week on episode 12, we have our usual slots of news from around the coast and of course our very popular Maritime Words of the Week. And this week we're speaking to maritime enthusiast David Carroll with a particular leaning towards lifeboats, who joins us to share some fascinating stories, not just the well-known rescues but some of the lesser known and largely forgotten stories that deserve to be told. So whether you're listening in at home, in the car or on the train, or indeed from one of those 24 countries now tuning in, settle in. This is episode 12 of Steady As She Goes. Now, just before we get into the news from around the coast, a quick note on last week's episode. Of course, we had Elisa Rushby with us, and we had a really lovely and thoughtful conversation about the ill-fated Irish Lights vessel Isolde. Since that episode went out, it sparked a bit of debate, and I have to say I'm very happy about that, because that's what it's all about: sharing stories, challenging each other, and getting the history written down. It's all about discussing those stories and examining the detail. So the discussion centres on the type of aircraft that bombed the Isolde. There are conflicting reports and differing pieces of research as to whether it was a Condor or a Heinkel class aircraft involved in the attack. There's evidence pointing in different directions, and as with so many wartime events, the paper trail isn't always as straightforward as we might like. I've had some further correspondence from Elisa, which I'll share with you in due course, but in the meantime, if anyone listening has additional information, original documentation, or sources that might help clarify the record, we'd be absolutely delighted to hear from you. And that's how we build a clearer picture moving forward and chatting about these things together. So please do get in touch if you can add anything to that particular discussion. So now it's time for news from around the coast, and this week we say a very happy birthday to the Isle of Inishmore, a ferry favourite turning 29 years old. And she, of course, is a very familiar vessel to us here in Rossiter Harbour and, of course, up on the Dublin-Holyhead route. This week, back in 1997, Irish Ferries Isle of Inishmore undertook her maiden voyage across the Irish Sea between Dublin and Holyhead. Nearly 3 decades on, and she remains one of the most recognisable and much-loved vessels in the Irish Ferries fleet. After her early years on the Dublin route, she was later relocated to operate on the more southerly service between Rossiter Europort and Pembroke Dock, a move that earned her a loyal following of regular passengers. Many of them fondly remember her excellent onboard facilities and, of course, the comfortable crossing down through Milford Haven. Then in 2021, in what some described as a surprising but ambitious move, Irish Ferries launched a brand new route across the English Channel between Dover and Calais, with Isle of Inishmore becoming the lead ship on that service. So a very happy birthday to Isle of Inishmore, a vessel that has carried generations of passengers across the Irish Sea and continues to serve on international waters today. Now, staying with Rossiter Europort, and we have some figures in for the month of February. As always, the team have been busy on watch, and Brian has kindly shared the facts and figures for the month just gone. There were 149 arrivals into the port in February, and that compares to 144 arrivals in January of 26 and also 144 in February of 2025. So despite the various receptions we've seen, whether technical or weather related, the port is actually 5 arrivals up on February of last year. That's very interesting, and it shows a steady and consistent flow of trade continuing through Rossiter Europort and very much business as usual. And I suppose You know, the Brexit bounce and the increase and the spikes in vessels and traffic in and out of Rosslare Harbour has certainly settled down now, and it seems to have really copper fastened itself as a very consistent route to the continent. Car carriers in particular are still going strong early into this year, and despite all the talk of cost of living pressures and economic headwinds, there remains a steady stream of new trade cars arriving in through the port. And I suppose it's another reminder of just how important the port is, not just locally but nationally, and keeps goods moving and trade flowing. So thanks once again there to Brian Boyce for collating and sharing those figures. Now in RNLI news, and the Dunleary RNLI coxswain has retired after 36 years of service, and we mark the retirement of a man who has spent more than 3 decades answering the call to save lives at sea. Dunleary RNLI coxswain Mark McGibney has brought to an end an extraordinary 36 years of volunteer service with the RNLI. Mark first joined the lifeboat crew in 1989 and went on to serve right through to 2025, a remarkable commitment by any standard. During that time, he was involved in 386 lifeboat launches. In those callouts, 661 people were brought to safety, with 36 of those officially recorded as lives saved. That's some record. He was appointed coxswain of the station's Trent-class all-weather lifeboat in 2002, but of course his contribution went far beyond that role. Over the years, Mark also served as lifeboat helm, all-weather mechanic, lifeboat trainer assessor, first aider, shore crew and navigator, a reflection of both his dedication and indeed his skills and depth of knowledge. Speaking about his retirement, the RNLI Regional Business Lead Mike Grocott described 36 years of service as a proud achievement, noting that many people, both locally and further afield, were helped by Mark during some of the most difficult moments of their lives. Mark will be presented with a framed certificate of service from the RNLI in recognition of his years of dedication. And from all of us here at Steady As She Goes, we want to wish Mark the very best in his retirement. 36 years of turning out in all weathers, 386 launches and hundreds brought safely home. Mark, thanks for your fantastic dedication and for everything you've done for those in need at sea. Staying with RNLI news, and a very special naming ceremony took place at Exmouth Lifeboat Station in Devon recently. On Saturday the 21st of February, RNLI 911 Challenge, a brand new D-Class inshore lifeboat, was officially named, funded entirely through the remarkable efforts of Belinda and James Richardson. In celebration of the RNLI's 200th anniversary in 2024, the couple undertook an extraordinary road trip in their Porsche 911, travelling the entire coastline of the UK and Ireland. They began in Morecambe in Lancashire and finished in Peel of the Isle of Man, completing the journey in exactly 911 hours, 911 being the common theme across this project. Along the way, they visited lifeboat stations right around the coast, including here in Ireland, meeting volunteers and seeing firsthand the work being done to save lives at sea. Their original fundraising target was £110,000, and in the end they raised more than £130,000 sterling. That contribution not only funded the new D-Class lifeboat, but also covered the training and kit for 3 volunteer crew members, with additional funds supporting ongoing maintenance. The D-Class lifeboat herself was first introduced in 1963, of course, and it's a vital part of the RNLI fleet today, particularly suited to rescues in shallow water, surf and tight conditions. And RNLI 911 Challenge now joins the charity's relief fleet, meaning it can be deployed to any station where it's needed. Relief boats alone launched 717 times in 2024, assisting 730 people. And speaking at the ceremony, Belinda described the project as something tangible, something supporters could touch and see, knowing that they'd helped create a vessel that will one day save lives. And of course, that is a fine example of dedication, generosity, and a strong bond between lifeboat communities right around our coast. A fantastic achievement, and well done to the Richardsons there for that great project. Now to news from Tides and Tales, and of course we've entered a new month, and of course it's time for the Tides and Tales monthly blog. Always a welcome read for anyone with an interest in our maritime past. This month's edition features a fascinating story about Geoffrey Spencer and what's described as his Oriental gamble. Geoffrey Spencer was the founder of the Spencer shipping operation, which burst into life with an all-or-nothing bet on Waterford Quays in 1869. This story charts the family shipping enterprise that flourished for almost 50 years, from the initial fateful risk on the purchase of the Newfoundland brigantine Oriental. An all-or-nothing bet on Waterford Quays in 1869, and from that single decision, a shipping enterprise that lasted nearly half a century. It's exactly the kind of story we appreciate here at Steady As She Goes: risk, ambition, maritime enterprise, and the way coastal towns were shaped by bold decisions made on their quaysides. So if you haven't already discovered Tides and Tales, I'd highly recommend it. Month after month, it delivers well-researched, beautifully told maritime history that deserves to be read and shared. And you can find the latest edition online at tidesandtales.ie or through the Facebook page, and it's very much worth a few moments of your time. Now, a note for your diary. The Dublin Bay Old Gaffers Association is presenting an illustrated lecture in aid of the RNLI titled Remembering Admiral Sir Henry Coy Kane. The talk will be delivered by maritime historian David Carroll at the Poolbeg Yacht and Boat Club in Ringsend on Thursday, March the 19th at 2000 hours. So that's Thursday, March 19th at 8 p.m. David will be exploring the life of Admiral Kane, including his remarkable command of HMS Calliope during the Great Hurricane at Apia in 1889, a story of extraordinary seamanship. All are welcome, with a contribution to the RNLI at the door. That's Tuesday, March 19th, 8 p.m, Poolbeg Yacht Club, and at Ringsend, of course, and that's with David Carroll. Now, before we move on, I want to give a special mention to A to B VSC, the fantastic maritime blogger whose post inspired the piece above about Isle of Inishmore. So, you can find them online at A to B VSC. I'll spell that out: A, and then the number 2, letter B, and then via csea.co.uk. So that's a2bvsc.co.uk. And they share incredibly detailed ferry reviews along with loads of interior photography and sailing insights from routes across the Irish Sea, the English Channel and beyond. If you're on social media, they're well worth a follow too. You'll find A2BVSC on Facebook and across their social channels, where they regularly post ships visits, sailing updates and behind the scenes content for maritime enthusiasts. So if ferries are your thing, or even if you just want to see some nicely maintained ships and onboard spaces, give A2B VSC a follow and show them some support. And thanks for all the great content. We hope you're back aboard another one soon. It really is very interesting stuff. Now to something a little bit more serious for this week's episode. As we all know, there's a war raging in the Middle East at the moment, and oil terminals are targets, shipping lanes are tense, and tankers are trying to move where they can, particularly in around the Strait of Hormuz. It's quite a serious situation there, but still ships keep sailing as much as they can. And on board those ships are men and women who signed on not for politics, not for the headlines, but simply to make a living, to pay for school fees, for mortgages, simply to put food on the table and send money home. And when a seafarer signs on, or of course these days they sign a seafarers employment agreement, they accept the heavy weather, they accept the long nights, and they accept time away from family. And of course quietly they accept that sometimes their ship may sail into other dangers. And that's always been a part of the profession, and right now oil and gas tankers sit at the centre of global tension. They're not combat vessels, they're not warships, they're working ships. But they find themselves moving through regions where missiles and drones are no longer abstract news items. It's reality, and still they sail on as much as they can. I meet seafarers every week in my own job, particularly on tankers, and very often they don't know where their next loading port will be, they don't know where they'll discharge the next cargo, they don't know what geopolitical situation might unfold during the next voyage. They simply prepare the vessel as best they can, check their cargo plans, complete the paperwork, and they get on with it, professional, calm and dedicated. And of course it reminds us of another time, during the Second World War, when Irish ships continued to trade to keep this country alive, neutral on paper but never untouched. Of course, we recently covered the story of the Kerlogue when she rescued survivors from the sea, and Irish crews crossed mined waters and submarine patrol routes to bring fuel and food home. Ships like the Irish Pine and the Irish Oak were torpedoed, and these people were not sailors, they were merchant seafarers, but they stood in the gap between isolation and survival. They kept Ireland supplied, they brought coal, grain, fertiliser. They crossed the dangerous seas not for glory, but because the country needed them to. And today's seafarers are no different. They don't control global politics, they don't decide on the shipping routes, and they don't choose where tensions flare, but they still show up. They sail into that uncertainty, they handle the volatile cargoes with precision, they operate complex vessels with discipline and skill. And most people never think about them. And I was struck by this last Saturday when an article on our national radio simply described that only one small tanker has been hit so far. And I think that does those seafarers a disservice, because whether it's one small tanker or 1,000 huge tankers, it's still seafarers that keep them going. And when the fuel reaches the pump, when the gas heats us at home, and when the supermarket shelves are full, there's a seafarer behind that. In times of peace, they are very much invisible. In times of tension, they are essential. And I think that's the quite truth of it. The seafarer has always carried more than cargo. They carry responsibility, they carry risk, they carry the steady continuation of daily life. Just like all of the Irish crews before them, just like those who sailed through wartime Atlantic waters under the tricolour, hoping neutrality would be respected but knowing it might not be. War changes headlines, it shifts markets, it redraws maps, but the ships still sail. And aboard them are professionals, keeping the world moving even when the world feels unsteady. So I just like, on behalf, I suppose, of seafarers, for everyone just to pause and remember them, particularly in these times of global tension. Because without seafarers, without the ships, we simply could not survive. Now, for this week's feature on Steady as She Goes, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by David Carroll, a maritime enthusiast with a specific interest in lifeboats. And David is the author, of course, of Dauntless Courage, the excellent book on the Dunmore East lifeboat and station. And for this feature, we're going to delve a little further into some of the stories in that fantastic book, of course. But first of all, you're very welcome to Steady as She Goes, David.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're
Delighted.
very welcome, and you've quickly become a friend of the podcast, which is great, David, because it's another arm of knowledge and interest that of course we're delighted to explore. And you've had a couple of visits in recent times down to the Maritime
Uh,
Centre here in Rossiter Harbour, and it's safe to say that you've enjoyed them, I think.
Absolutely lovely crowd of lads. It's brilliant. Really, really two enjoyable afternoons in recent weeks. So,
Fantastic. So, David, I suppose to get us started, where did you first get your interest in all things maritime, and then, of course, specifically lifeboats?
well, I was brought up in Dunmore East in the harbour. I moved when I was 6 months old. I was born in Dublin, but my father moved to Dunmore East in 1947. He was appointed harbour master. So I can't. I arrived in Dunmore when I was 6 months old.
Yeah.
I was brought up right in the harbour, like about 10 meters away from the water. So had salt water in my veins at a very early stage.
Lovely. And Dunmore East, of course, is one of those places where you feel that the harbour and the town, the village, is almost a part of the sea. It's not something that you look down into or far away from. You're part of it when you're standing there. Isn't that right?
Correct. Yeah. My
Yeah.
my bedroom looked out onto the quay. I could see like the lifeboat and the pilot boat. It's just a
Fantastic.
brilliant place to grow up. Really.
Ab- Absolutely, yeah. So it's very easy to see how you quickly developed an interest. I suppose you probably didn't have any choice, only be interested in it, really.
I know I was bred in, or what's the word? I was just, yeah, brought up with boats and ships and knots and all sorts of things, Morse code, you name it.
Fantastic, fantastic. And lifeboats then, was that again from an early age? Obviously, you could see the lifeboat itself. What's your earliest memory of a lifeboat in Dunmore East?
Well, I remember I used to row around the harbour in my little dinghy. Now we always call us punts in Dunmore. You
Yeah,
daren't say the word dinghy because dinghy was just for yachtsmen. But Dick Murphy was the motor mechanic. He'd been now uncle of Nico Murphy and Dunmore and
yes,
famous fisherman, and poor John who died recently, and
yeah.
Jokey as well. But Dick could invite me up, and he'd be going over the engines, and I used to love the smell. The brass would be shining. It was really terribly interesting, and Lifeboat had two engines, which I thought was just amazing. That a boat with two engines, if one failed, the other one would get them home.
Yeah,
I thought it
amazing.
was the most brilliant thing I ever had.
Those sensory, things like the smells
Yeah,
and the
like
sights,
it's
like the brass was always something like in the older lifeboats that really caught the attention of people. And I remember Matt Wickham, who was the mechanic for years and years here in Rosslare, woe betide anyone who stood on the brass after it was done, because that was done to look well, and it did, like it just brought something special to the boat when that brass was shining.
because like on the fishing boat, you get the old smell from the bilge, and you get a few bait or something going rotten or something, and
Yeah.
lifeboat was so different.
So pristine, yeah.
And near our house, they had a little oil shed, fuel shed, and on it was the board, the record boards.
Oh yes, yeah,
So every day I would pass those going to school and always look up and see all these names: Henry, Dodd, and Fanny, Harriet, and
yeah,
so to stayed in my all my life that those names have been there at the back of my mind.
yeah. History was there every day for you then, walking
Yeah,
past all, yeah. And those service boards are fascinating. Like we have a
yeah.
good few of them here.
They've one in Dunmore. They think was preserved, so it's in the station.
I suppose if we fast forward, then I know yourself and Brendan Dunn, and we're hopefully going to speak to Brendan about his time aboard lifeboats. He's recently retired, of course, but yourself and Brendan, of course, was kind of a joint venture with the book, the Dauntless Courage. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, how it started. Brendan gave a talk in 2016 on the history of the lifeboats, and myself and my wife, we went down from Dublin and we stayed in the village, and we went to the talk, and we were looked after really well that night. We had a lovely meal before the talk, and then chat afterwards. So it was a lovely event, and I just reconnected totally with the history. And I was fascinated.
Yeah,
And then subsequently, I asked Brendan for information on the feather disaster. Could he get me the service records, which he did.
very
And
good.
I was terribly interested because an awful lot of the emphasis when you read about it, it was all to do with the Wexford tug and the Wexford lifeboat.
Yeah,
Dunmore lifeboat didn't get the same level of
kudos, I
publicity.
suppose.
Yeah. And for those men to have rowed around the hook, I mean, that was some achievement.
Incredible.
Yeah. So they kind of then you and done more than that. I was sort of interested in. At that stage, I started writing the odd occasional blog for Andrew Doherty's Tide and Tales,
Yeah.
which really kicked off my main interest in maritime writing and affairs.
Excellent. And that you found your way then across to RNLI HQ in Poole in Dorset. And I suppose that's where we kind of start our journey for this particular part of Steady as She Goes. You went over there to meet with the archivist, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, Neve Stevenson, who was the medium manager for the RNLI in Ireland, well, she knew we were writing the book, and she arranged for us to go over. So Brendan and myself flew over to Bournemouth and went on to Poole. It was just before COVID hit Ireland. We were we were very lucky. Probably following week we probably wouldn't have gone, but anyway, we got in and out of the
Yeah.
UK before the lockdown came. And Brendan had been there several times, like doing training courses, so he was familiar with the whole setup, and we stayed in the hotel. But
Lovely.
going into the college, there's this wonderful memorial at the entrance, and it commemorates all the people from around the coasts of Ireland and Great Britain of the all those who lost their lives while attempting to save the lives of others. And it's a more really profound sort of a occasion, a powerful sort of thing. I was really struck by it, and it's a stainless steel sort of monument at the top with a lifeboat and a man in the boat, just
Yeah.
one man reaching out his hand to somebody in the water, just touching his hand. And then on the side, they have all the names of those who have been lost from the time the RNLI was founded in 1824. So we could see the feathered men, Fintan Sinnott and Kilmore, Philip Boucher and Dunmore East. And it was sort of a very emotional sort of thing to see.
I can imagine. And what they've done really nicely with that monument is, I feel anyway, they've blended modern design and tradition really well.
Great.
I think the design is really nice, that imagery of somebody, reaching out to save somebody else. And then we'll put a picture up, if you don't mind, the one you sent me,
Yeah.
for everyone to see. But the way the names are inscribed in wave format and all of that, I think it's really nicely done, and a very fitting tribute, of course, to all those who have lost their lives in the attempt to rescue others. It's really nice, isn't it?
It stayed with me for a long while, and when the book was finished and published and out of the way, I kind of got back to it and I started doing some research. I found it was 84 Irish names on that monument.
Wow.
My sort of area of main interest would be sort of counties Waterford and Wexford around Waterford Harbour.
Yeah.
And it was 30 people had lost their lives between counties Wexford and County Waterford.
Amazing, really, isn't it? For such
Yeah,
a small part of the world, let's say, but and we all know, of course, that, and we'll speak much more in other episodes, and we have done in previous episodes, about the density of seafarers that came from Wexford and Waterford is phenomenal, really, when you look at it. And I suppose the law of averages will say then that, there are likely more to have lost their lives, but that's a huge number, 84 for the whole of Ireland and
yeah,
30 between Waterford and Wexford. It's a big percentage, isn't it?
it is. Now, some of them are well known, so I mean, there's plenty of information there. Like the feathered one has been very well publicised and is commemorated every year. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
Similarly, with John Power did a great job remembering the loss of Fintan Sinnott.
yeah, absolutely.
And down in Dungarvan, there was Michael Hogan was lost when the lifeboat went out on the second occasion at the Moresby. That was on Christmas 1895.
Yeah,
And Dungarvan did a wonderful job, like commemorating that tragedy. But there was two names I spotted, and they were John Fitzgerald and Thomas Crotty from Tramore. Never heard of them. Didn't know who they were. Um, so we had to start a little bit of research and found that they were lost in 1858. January 1858 was a French vessel. Like Tramore Bay was a notorious place for shipwrecks.
yeah,
And this was just one of many. I mean, Tramore, you could do a blog on or a podcast on Tramore and all the shipwrecks because it's an amazing story. But this French vessel was lost in January, end of January, 29th of January in 1858. And six fishermen from Brownstown, that's, the headland at one end of Tramore Bay,
the famous Brownstown Head. Yeah,
they set out. And four of them or two were lost and four were saved or didn't, so it sent shockwaves through the whole community in Waterford City as well. And a committee was got up to, raise funds for the bereaved families
yeah,
and also to, because at that stage, Tramore did not have a dedicated lifeboat. Up to that, it was just sort of fishermen going out, or the Coast Guards on occasions, and the RNLI in London was petitioned, and they gave Tramore life. It just came at the very end of 1858, just around the last day of the year.
Right.
So that tragedy sort of was kind of profound because it's the reason Tramore got a lifeboat, and it went on. They had several lifeboats until 1820, or sorry, 1924, when Dunmore received a motor lifeboat, or were getting one in 1925, the CNS. So the Tramore was a pulling and sailing lifeboat, so it was withdrawn.
Right. Okay.
Tramore didn't have a lifeboat until the mid 60s, when, but there wouldn't have been a lifeboat in the first place, only for these two men who gave up their lives,
So they were the catalysts
the
for.
catalyst, and we couldn't find out where they were buried. So presumably they were never found. There was no memorial that we could
Wow.
find. So I wrote up a blog for Andrew's Tide and Tales, and I said it might be a nice idea if their names were added to the memorial in Dunmore for those lost at sea.
Yeah.
And exactly a year later, the two names were added, which I was very pleased about. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
a little story on Tides and Tales had that effect. So I was delighted to see the names added.
To have them recorded locally, though, was probably more important in one
It
way.
was, and their names appear with the four Air Corps men who were lost in Tramore in 1999,
Yes.
and Philip Boucher, who was lost from the Dunmore lifeboat in, I think, 1893. So they have a little section on the wall, which is nice.
Very nice indeed.
So I
Yeah.
was delighted that something I wrote had that effect, and many thanks to John Welch and Dunmore and his committee who look after that memorial.
It's a beautiful memorial itself as
Yeah,
well. Like the fact that we have to have these memorials, I suppose, is sad in one way, but it's an inherent risk of seafaring and life saving that people will be lost. But we're blessed really with the likes of the Kilmore Quay Monument, the Dunmore
yeah,
East Monument. So much thought, so much planning, and lovely design
yeah,
work has gone into these, and it's only right that those two gentlemen were recorded on that. So it must be quite, very proud for you for to
yeah.
have.
It was a nice. I was very pleased. This is punch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the other one that struck me was there was four names, and they were accredited to Cortown, and because my wife comes from close to Cortown, obviously I was very interested,
Hmm.
and I started the old research, going on the internet and what have you, and discovered that they actually weren't from Cortown. Now, how would I explain to you how that probably came about? There was a ship called the R.H. Tucker from Wisconsin, went up on the Blackwater Bank.
That famous bank that claims so
Well,
many.
many, yeah. There was another
Mm.
one. The Cortown lifeboat set out, and also took off some of the men. Then the Cohor lifeboat was first out and took off some of the men. The Cortown lifeboat went out, stood by, and then the vessel went on fire. So they took off the remainder of the crew. So nobody was lost on the vessel, which was good. But ship was burnt down to the gunwale. Now, meanwhile, in Curracloe, at daybreak on the following morning, because this ship on fire could be seen, I'm told, as far as Wicklow. So
Wow.
Curracloe Coast Guards, six of them set off in a whaleboat, and they rowed about 4 miles, and the conditions were too bad to continue, so they turned back. And just as they reached Curracloe on their way back, just off the shore, they were capsized.
My God.
Six of them into the water, and they weren't wearing life jackets, because probably when they were pulling the boat, they were too awkward.
Cumbersome.
One man swam ashore. One arrived back on shore, and in a terrible condition, but he survived. But four of them were lost. And as far as I know, and I'm open to correction, and I'd love to be proved wrong, there's no memorial to them.
Is that
To
right?
that's the best of my knowledge. And I'd love to be proved wrong
Yeah.
on this. So it
That,
might be,
that's quite amazing, really,
yeah,
that they haven't been commemorated. And I think that with the research that yourself and the rest of your fellow enthusiasts do, I think if it had been, commemorated, you certainly would have known about it. So maybe that's a bit of a campaign that we might have to embark on.
yeah. So one for the lads in Rosslare.
Yeah,
Two of them I know are buried locally in graveyards. I think there would be probably Church of Ireland graveyards.
yeah,
That would be Flynn, who was, I think, the chief boatman.
yeah. He
Uh,
was down as a chief officer, wasn't he?
yeah,
Uh, yeah, Chief Officer Richard Flynn.
and
Unusual name, the spelling of the name Flynn there, actually.
you see, that probably was a handwritten record that came from Cortown Lifeboat, I'd say. Who
Yeah,
That's how RNLI got those details. They probably came from Cortown.
and would have been spelled phonetically, probably
Yeah.
Flinn. Yeah,
Now, if you look through old Coast Guards, there is Flynn's with an I, but because of the inscription on on the tombstone, it's spelled with a Y. So
right.
Flynn, I believe, is correct, but the RNLI records have them as FLINN.
That's just an interesting little aside, actually, in all parts of history and recording. A slip of a pen can change history forever. I know this is a name we're talking about in phonetics, but a slip of a pen or an interpretation of somebody's handwriting can change so much, and that's something
Absolutely.
I'm sure you've come across as well.
I could tell you about, yeah, Coxon. This is digressing a bit, but Coxon and the Cohor lifeboat. I mean, I saw a tree spelling. His name was Carher.
Right.
It was Carrick. It was spelled with K's and H's and no H's and G's.
Yeah.
But I finally, anyway, got we got it right in the end. But several people had it incorrect. But
And those that were the two that were buried, obviously locally, were the other two bodies found as well, or are
yeah,
they
I
buried
didn't
elsewhere?
find any record. Now, a lot of this information, a lady called Olivia Murray, who lives funny in Booterstown, quite close to where I live, but as yet we haven't met in person, but we email, and
Yeah.
it's on my bucket list to meet Olivia because she's terribly helpful. Anything to do with Coast Guard, she's wonderful. She's able to do the research, and she's very generous then with her information. But
Excellent. Yeah.
she got a lot of information on Joseph Randall, who was one of the other men lost. And it turns out that he was actually born in Johnstown in County Wexford.
No, I'm just thinking and I'm delighted you've brought up Joseph Randall because, as you've said in your blog, he led a most adventurous life, and I know you're going to go on to talk about that now. But Johnstown, would that be the same Johnstown as Johnstown Castle, I wonder? Is that the roughly the area he would have come from, I
Well,
wonder?
that's my understanding.
Yeah, because there isn't too many Johnstowns I know
No,
around Wexford, so that's what I'm thinking. But
yeah,
this man had served an interesting few years of
it
his life,
is.
hadn't he?
He went off to the Royal Navy when he was 16, and he was on he his career. He ended up with, first of all, he got an Arctic medal.
Yeah.
He was on a ship, I think the HMS Hurd, I think it is.
The
And
Herald, yeah, he joined her on the 5th of March,
yeah,
1845.
they were six. They were 6 years away,
Yeah,
and they
that's
were
that in itself is fascinating. Now I know people did long trips, and still do, and even the current naval days, you sign on for a couple of years, but a 6 year voyage, like, we're talking about 1845,
to 51.
and the conditions, this is what fascinates me all the time about all of this, and this is what I implore people to think about and look back at. you know, we have very modern ways of going to sea nowadays, but in 1845, conditions, even for officers and masters and everything, with the privileges they would have had, it would be fairly primitive.
And while they were away, they were asked to or assigned to help look for Franklin, who was went missing when he was trying to find the Northwest Passage.
Yeah,
He vanished without trace, so that was part of their task while they were away on the six-year voyage. So when he came back from that, he got involved in the Crimean War,
yeah.
and he got another medal. He got the Crimean Medal, and after that, he was in the Baltic, and he won a Baltic medal. So he had three medals.
And three
Back
fairly hard got medals as well.
absolutely, because I think he had a quite a serious accident. Now I didn't. It was I think in Olivia's notes, but I didn't add it to what I wrote. I think a fairly serious accident somewhere along the line.
Okay.
And then he signed up for more. He re-enlisted again in the Navy, and he became a Coast Guard initially in Britain and England in Whitehaven, and then he came to Curracloe just shortly before poor man drowned, which was close to his home native place, and he left a widow and three children.
What were the
And
circumstances of his drowning? Did you find out, David?
well, four of them were lost, like they couldn't make the shore or they were drowned.
Yeah.
Two from the boat got ashore, one in a very bad state, and one man obviously was a strong swimmer. He made it.
And of
And the
course they had
families
no
were watching
support.
as they
Oh,
drowned.
oh really?
Yeah,
Because of course they had I suppose somebody knew that they had turned back and they were waiting for it to come ashore then at
yeah,
that
because
stage.
that probably might have been around early afternoon, I guess.
And they were only 4 miles off, of course, at that stage as
Yeah,
well. So the families may still have been watching from the time they launched, perhaps.
yeah. They set
That
off at 5 a.m., so
yeah.
probably early afternoon when they got back. And they were just close to the shore when a big wave turned them over.
And he was only 47 when he
That's
drowned.
right. So he's buried in, I think it's Ard Column, or just two of them anyway are buried sort of in local graveyards.
Yeah. And
And 20 children orphaned.
incredible. But he Randall himself, like he was some character having gone through all of that. And I suppose the Coast Guard would have been a natural stepping stone from the Navy, like heading towards retirement. Was
It
that
would
the
be,
way it
I'd say,
was?
yeah,
Yeah. It was a paid role, of course, they're
yeah.
volunteer roles now, like, but it was an arm or a wing of the Navy at the time, I suppose.
It was, yeah. It was probably he'd done his stint,
Yeah, he
I would
surely
say.
had.
Yeah,
But isn't it fascinating though that a man from a little part of South County Wexford went on to do all those great
yeah.
things, and it's even more fascinating that he hasn't really been formally commemorated, or
To the
his
best of my
comrades.
knowledge, I'm open to correction now. Olivia Murray, who would be very good on social media, and that she tracked down a lady in Canada who was a descendant and got all the information,
Yeah.
which I used, and subsequently in the person you probably know, Stella Purcell Bates,
Yes. Yeah.
had it on the historical Wexford, so I saw it there as well. So subsequently, so it's out there, that information.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
But
think
it's
it's
nice
certainly
if
something we need to bring it forward. I think and
exactly,
explore how we could potentially have a plaque somewhere or some kind of a commemoration
yeah,
for these guys, because it's certainly deserved. And people need to know more about these people, these seafarers as well. And of course, that's one of the missions of the podcast.
yeah,
And I know your blog and Tides and Tales, everyone is trying their best to keep these stories alive. But it's part of who we are, isn't it?
absolutely,
Out of all your research, David, and I know I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here now, but out of all your research, I'm sure there's lots and lots that stand out and has taken you aback and to pardon the pun, taken the wind out of your sails. Is there one or two situations, rescues, people that really, really stand out in your head?
Okay. Well, the Carlog, I'd have to say, would be right up there at the top.
Yeah.
And I wrote my version. I mean, obviously it's the same story, but I had perhaps a little more emphasis on Captain O'Donoghue because of the Waterford connection.
Yeah, he was a another brave man and
Yeah.
another
And then there was,
man who was really the humanity of him and I often think about when all those German sailors came aboard, and there must have been a fair level of charisma and trust and all sorts of different traits about that man and the crew for those German sailors to trust him in that short
yeah,
space of time to make the decision, right, we're going to go with this man wherever he's bringing us.
absolutely, it's an amazing story.
And in another part of this week's podcast, I'm speaking about seafarers during wartime and the parallels of what's going on at the present day and back when the likes of the Carlog and the Irish shipping vessels and all were going around. But Donoghu was another one of those people who we must keep his memory alive. But you were going to say there was another one that came to
Well,
mind there.
Father O'Shea, the parish priest of Ardmore, he was a gold medal recipient from the RNLI. I mean, there's
Right,
only been perhaps five Irish people have won gold medals, and he was one of them. 1911, they a schooner went aground in Ardmore, and tried to set off and save the crew. Now they failed, but
right,
because of his bravery, he won a gold medal.
fantastic. And he was a
Yeah,
local priest.
it's the parish priest of Ardmore.
Wow, that would have been what year did you say that
Yeah,
was?
1911.
Like that would have been highly unusual, I think. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, for the parish priest to be on the lifeboat crew.
Well, it wasn't. It was they just took a boat,
Right, they just
a
on
yawl, or
there wasn't an official service. They just said, right, we're going to
they
go and help if we can.
there was a lifeboat in Dungarvan, but I mean they set off in whatever you know boat they could find. I think they brought it over land.
Okay,
Yeah, it's a great story. So it's up on tide. You'll find it on Tides and Tales.
yeah, I have a look at that. Yeah,
He was so it was- he won a gold medal, um, which was fairly unique.
absolutely.
Yeah, so have a take a look at that story.
Yeah, that's a very interesting sounding
Yeah,
one.
no, it's been well. Like the people in Ardmore are very proud of that story, and it's documented quite extensively. But I took a sort of a used information where I could find it and put something together.
Yeah, as a young boy growing up in Dunmore East, what do you remember your father's role being like way back then? Like I suppose there was there was a lot of stuff going on, but what's your memories of what was going on back then?
But he seemed to be able to sort of stop all the because you had we would have had German vessels, fishing trawlers,
Yeah,
Dutch, and there was very bad blood between the Dutch and the Germans because I mean Second World War wasn't over that long. I mean we're talking maybe 12 years, and the Dutch had been made fish. They were put out to fish,
yeah,
and they didn't like each other, and they'd be jockeying for positions in the harbour. And I mean, the harbour wasn't that big, so he
yeah.
seemed to do a good job anyway. He kept he kept everybody happy as
He
far
was
as
peacemaker,
peacemaker.
and of course that would have all been around the huge herring fishery then.
Yeah, the luggers would come and load up with barrels.
Yeah. That in itself, those memories in themselves must be amazing because I've heard and read so much about the herring fisheries
Yeah, I mean, it
in
all
this
took
part of the world.
place 10 yards from our doorstep. You
Yeah,
know, you'd hear outside the bedroom window at night to be fellas doing barrels. You'd hear them tapping, tapping away.
yeah, amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's incredible, really. For such a small part of the world, again, a massive connection to the rest of the world
Yeah,
through seafaring and through fishing. And I
yeah,
remember, um, Frances Lodi when she was in the pilot station there.
yeah,
I distinctly remember her voice. I think was the pilot vessel called Dunmore.
yeah.
Will I be right? Or
Uh,
else she was calling back to Dunmore Harbour. I can't remember, but um, the 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 tone of her voice coming across on the radio, I can still hear it today
yeah,
because we would have had a VHF growing up all the time in the house, or if we were out at sea for whatever
yeah,
reason, and that very distinctive voice and tone coming through on the radio. The conversation between the pilot station, the pilot boat, and the harbour itself, and yeah, amazing, really.
yeah.
Um, Thinking back to then and thinking now and all the research you've done and all the bits and pieces you've found out, you must be immensely proud of where you come from and the seafaring traditions, are you?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was great to get back to connect back, and it's really through Andrew Doherty's Tides and Tales that kicked it all off. Because I didn't go, I was expected to go to sea when I was young, but I didn't. I went in. I started working in water at flour mills when I left school, so didn't go to sea, but I kept my interest.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then since I retired, I mean, it's all go with maritime stuff. Sorry, I didn't start start much earlier. Yeah,
Sure, look, it's never too
yeah,
late, and
yeah,
your insight into all of this stuff, David, is fascinating, and we're really glad to have you now on board. It's been a while getting you linked in between my schedule and your schedule, but we've broken the ice now, and you're locked in now, and I
no,
don't
well,
think you realize how long how much more communication we're going to have. But it's great to have you aboard. Long may it last, and we know, of course, you have your very first lecture coming up soon. Is that right?
that's correct. Yeah, making my debut as a talker. Up to now, it's been all in writing,
Yeah,
but yeah, Cormac Cloud, who you met recently and spoke to, he organises a series of winter talks on behalf of the Dublin Bay Old Gaffers Association, and they're used the old Pool Bay Yacht Club in Ringsend in Dublin.
yeah,
Wonderful. Every winter, Cormac puts together a really interesting series of lectures, and they're all in aid of the RNLI, which is great. And the gaffers then in the following summer would make a presentation, a check to it's the lifeboat in Hote is their choice.
lovely.
And it's always a very nice figure they collect from the talks. So I'm part of the series this year. So I'm
And what's your
talking.
lecture going to be on,
It's
David?
been on a man called Admiral Henry Coe Kane, born in Blackrock in County Dublin, became famous in the Royal Navy. And not a lot I certainly didn't know a lot about him until Cormac brought it to my attention. He said, "There's somebody you should look up and
Yeah,
research." And so here we are. I've written the story has been published in a history journal here in Dublin, but this is the full kind of longer version with slightly more in it than in the written version.
very good. And
So I'm
when's
look,
that on?
that's on Thursday, the 19th of March, 8 o'clock in Poolbeg in Ringsend. So for anybody in Dublin or nearby, come along,
Definitely,
come to
yeah.
it.
We'll share that up on the social media, and we'll give it a shout out, of course, on subsequent episodes of Steady as she goes here. And maybe after that, then Cormac will, he'll get a sword out and put it on each shoulder, and he'll be officially a Marine buff. Then
Oh
maybe under
yeah.
Cormac's guise, will
Well,
you?
no, up to now, I'm only an apprentice. But that talk will be recorded, and it should go up on YouTube maybe a week or 2 weeks after the talk. So
Brilliant.
I'll let you all know in Rosslare.
Fantastic. Well, look at David. It's been once again fascinating chatting to you. It's really nice to get an insight into those, as you described to me, lesser known stories.
Mm.
1868 in Courtown, and then 1858 in Tremor Bay, and it's really nice to get a feeling for, particularly down in Tremor, how things started, and why there ended up being a lifeboat, and of course there's a lifeboat there now today as well. So it's always nice to hear how things began, and
Yeah.
I suppose to look back on it, those two individuals that were lost, it's great that their legacy lives on. They've been properly commemorated locally now, and of course on the main monument in Poole. But also the fact that there is a lifeboat there in Tramore now, and there was for so long. And each time a lifeboat puts to sea, we must remember those people, because perhaps only for them, as you say, there
Yeah.
wouldn't ever have been a lifeboat there. So it's fascinating, and all I'd like to say is thanks very much for your inaugural
It's an
chat here with
absolute
us, and
pleasure.
we'll be talking to you lots more in person and on the podcast. And very best of luck with your first chat up to the lads there in Poolbeg. I have no doubt that it will be really enjoyable, and we'll certainly promote it here on the podcast and on our social media. For now, David, as I say to all our guests, thank you very much, and steady as she goes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
And thanks once again to David Carroll for that really interesting chat. And David's passion for all things maritime, and particularly the lifeboat service, is really engaging, and he's done a huge amount of research. And I mentioned earlier in the news from around the coast, and we spoke about it in the chat, about his upcoming talk in Poolbeg Yacht Club on the 19th of March. So anyone that's available to pop up to that, I'm sure you'll find it most engaging. And thanks once again to David for his time. As I mentioned there in the chat, we certainly will be hearing more from him, and he has lots more stories to tell. And just to mention once more those two particular incidents that David highlighted there in the chat, and John Fitzgerald and Thomas Crotty were the two men drowned in their attempts to rescue the crew of the French brig Le Capricieuse in Tramore Bay in 1858. And then 10 years later, of course, in Courtown, we had Coast Guard Chief Officer Richard Flynn, Chief Boatman Joseph Randall, Commissioned Boatman William Smith, and Commissioned Boatman Samuel Henry Jenkins, and they all paid the ultimate price in their bid to save others at sea. Mareshte Guravahanaka Delish. And before we move on now, I'd just like to mention a campaign that's been started by the Tom Crane Story Facebook page, and certainly one I'm very happy to support here on Steady As She Goes. As many of you will know, I'm in absolute awe of Tom Crane, and in my own opinion, he's one of the greatest Irishmen to have ever lived. A man of extraordinary endurance, courage, and of course quiet resilience. So the page that I mentioned there, the Tom Crane Story Facebook page, has grown steadily over the years and has recently passed 37,000 followers. Now, with the 150th anniversary of Tom Crane's birth coming up in February of next year, there's a very ambitious goal, and the aim is to reach 50,000 followers before that anniversary, which means, of course, adding another 13,000 supporters in the year ahead. And it is a big ask, but as the page's creator Tim points out on the page, what started with just 4 followers back in 2010 has now grown to over 37,000 in 16 years. So there is proof there that the steady effort works out. Reaching that target would mean more eyes on the fascinating stories being published there, and they really are very, very engaging. Many drawn from original research and material that hadn't previously been shared before the release of Crane's biography. So if you admire Tom Crane's story, or if you value Irish maritime history, or you simply believe in recognising true character and grit, I'd encourage you to check out the Tom Crane Story on Facebook. Give it a follow, share the page, and use the hashtag #FollowTom. Let's see if we can help them reach that target. And now for our Maritime Words of the Week. And this week's Maritime Words of the Week is one that always raises a smile, and it's the Monkey Island. So if you've ever been up on a ship's bridge and climbed even higher up that narrow ladder to the small deck, sitting right on top of the wheelhouse, you've been on the Monkey Island. It's usually the highest accessible point on the vessel. Very windy and exposed, and I suppose a bit of a perch is how you'd describe it, really. You'll often find a magnetic compass up there, radar scanners, aerials, signal lights, all the important kit that needs height and a clear line of sight. But here's the question: why on earth is it called the Monkey Island? Now, from my research, the most commonly accepted explanation is fairly simple and fairly nautical. It was high up, awkward to access, and exposed to the elements, not exactly somewhere where you'd stroll up for comfort, so sailors joked that only someone as nimble as a monkey would be happy climbing up there, hence the Monkey Island. There's also an idea that it was just classic kind of naval and merchant naval humour, and as we know, sailors, particularly in the age of sail, had a habit of giving colourful nicknames to parts of the ship, and a windswept platform perched above the bridge probably deserves something memorable. Then there's a third theory, the powder monkey connection, young boys who carried gunpowder on warships, but historically there's very little evidence linking them to that position on the ship, so that explanation feels a little less convincing. But here's where we'd like your help. Have you heard a different origin story? Would you have been told a completely different explanation, maybe at sea from an old captain, a boatswain, or an old hand who swore blind that they knew the real reason? And for those of you who have served aboard, what was the Monkey Island like on your vessel? A lonely watchkeeping spot? A quiet place for a cup of tea? Or a place where you could maybe run away to get 5 minutes away from the mate or the chief engineer or whatever? Anyway, we'd really love to build a bit of a collection of sealed ore around this one. Drop us a message on our social channels or email the show and we'll share some of your stories in a future episode, because as we know, the best maritime history isn't always found in the books. Sometimes it's passed down from one watch to the next. So be very interested to hear what you have to say on that one, the Monkey Island. And the monkey does appear quite often. Of course, we had the monkey's fist way back in episode 1, I think it was. And there's a few monkey mentions in and around seafaring language. So be really interested to hear if there's any further explanation there on the Monkey Island. And that's all we have time for on this week's episode of Steady As She Goes. It's been another packed episode, and once again I'd like to say thanks to all the listeners and indeed all the contributors. It's great to be getting the emails coming in and indeed the messages on social media. We've lots more to come. We've now surpassed, as I said at the beginning, 1,000 streams and downloads, and we're driving forward. It's already at the end of episode 12, which is really amazing, and thanks for all the support. Don't forget, to, of course, to call down to visit the crew at the Roster Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre, open every Saturday from 12 to 4, and by appointment if you can't make it on the Saturday. I have to say it's great to see the influx of visitors we've had in recent months, and we're going through a bit of a revival period, which is fantastic, and it's great to see new faces coming in and contributing to our collection. So if you're at a loose end any Saturday, please pop down to see us at the Roster Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre, and admission, of course, is completely free. Once again, thanks for listening, safe sailing, and steady as she goes.
I am a bold young Wexford man, Tom O'Neill's my name. My father was a mariner and I long to be the same. I joined a few on a coastal crew for the mercantile marine, while a foreign war not far from shore was fought in the skies and seas. There were men from Cork and Dublin, from Limerick and Wexford town, and we sailed each day into the fray, far from solid ground. We shipped our load through a treacherous road and then returned again. We are the unsung heroes, we are the long watchmen.